My friends, it is no secret that in these days, anxiety seems to have woven itself into the very fabric of human experience. Everywhere you turn, there is news of uncertainty, rising costs, unstable economies, shifting jobs, unpredictable futures. The world appears to be trembling, and with that trembling, many sensitive hearts begin to tremble as well. But I want you to understand something at the very outset. The anxiety you feel does not arise from circumstances. It arises from a false sense of self that has believed it is at the mercy of circumstances. You see, when you believe yourself to be a separate creature, living apart from God, depending upon external sources for security, for supply, for direction, then fear becomes inevitable. It is as natural for the separated sense of self to fear as it is for the sun to shine. But this fear does not belong to your true identity. Fear belongs only to the image that the world has taught you to be. And so long as you accept that image fragile, vulnerable, dependent upon the shifting forms of this world, you will experience the anxiety that accompanies it. But the purpose of our time together is not to console this anxious self. No, it is far more radical than that. We are here to see through it. We are here to look beyond the mask of the anxious mind and discover the self that has never once trembled, never once feared, never once lacked anything. This self is the presence of God expressing as your very being. And when this is recognized, not believed, not affirmed, but recognized, the anxiety that seems so powerful loses its footing and dissolves like mist before the morning sun. So let us not begin by asking how to fix the problem out there. Let us begin by questioning the one who believes it is separate, threatened, and alone. For if we can touch even for a moment the truth of who you are behind the anxious thought, the entire structure of fear begins to crumble. And in its place, a peace that the world cannot understand and cannot take away quietly reveals itself. This is our work in this hour, not to change the world, but to awaken to the self that is not of this world. Let us go a little deeper now. If anxiety does not belong to your true self, then to whom does it belong? Joel Goldsmith often reminded us that the self which fears, the self which worries about tomorrow, the self which imagines itself threatened or abandoned, is not your real identity at all. It is a picture, an image formed in consciousness through centuries of collective belief, through education, culture, habit, and memory. It is the mortal self, the sense of existence that lives under the law of cause and effect, believing itself to be separate from God. This false sense of self stands at the center of human suffering, for it looks out upon a world it does not understand and imagines it must struggle to survive. It depends upon outer resources for strength, outer conditions for security, outer relationships for approval, outer signs for reassurance. And because outer things are always changing, this self is always afraid, always waiting for the next problem, the next loss, the next disappointment. Always defensive, always grasping, always seeking a stability that the world can never provide. Let us go a little deeper now. If anxiety does not belong to your true self, then to whom does it belong? Joel Goldsmith often reminded us that the self which fears, the self which worries about tomorrow, the self which imagines itself threatened or abandoned, is not your real identity at all. It is a picture, an image formed in consciousness through centuries of collective belief, through education, culture, habit, and memory. If you pay close attention, you will notice that the one who worries is always the same shadow. Whether the fear concerns your finances, your health, your relationships, or your future, it is always the same anxious voice speaking. The content of the worry changes, but the worrier remains unchanged. And this should give you a great clue. Anything that repeats itself without variation, anything that appears in many disguises but never changes its essential nature, cannot be the living self. Always defensive, always grasping, always seeking a stability that the world can never provide. Now, I want you to realize something very quietly. The false self does not need healing. It does not need blessing. It does not need more money, more protection, more reassurance, for it is not a real self at all. What it needs is to be seen through. It needs to be recognized as the illusion it is, and this recognition begins the moment you step back and observe it. But this frightened self is not you. It is only a bundle of conditioned thoughts. It has no life in God, no anchor in reality, no permanence whatsoever. And yet, because you have accepted it as yourself, you experience its fear as if it were your own. You wear it like a garment and say, "This is me." But it is not. It is merely the echo of the world's belief in separation. And so when anxiety arises, do not fight it, do not condemn it, do not struggle to change it. Simply recognize that the one who fears is not the one who lives as you. This recognition is the beginning of freedom. It is the quiet dawn before the sun of truth rises in your consciousness. As we continue, let us turn our attention to the great pronouncement that stands at the center of all spiritual realization. The kingdom of God is within you. These were not poetic words, not mystical riddles, not promises of a distant future. They were the simple statement of a present reality, a reality already established, already functioning, already complete. And it was this inner kingdom, this divine consciousness, that Joel Goldsmith dedicated his life to revealing. The anxious self, the fearful self, the seeking self, always looks outward. It looks to salaries, to savings, to doctors, to relationships, to opinions, to circumstances, and believes that in these external forms it will find stability. It searches the far horizon for signs of assurance, for evidence that the world will be kind, that life will cooperate, but the kingdom is not on the horizon. It is not in the circumstances. It is not in the future. It is not in the world. The kingdom is within the very presence of God expressing itself as your consciousness. And so, whenever you seek safety outside yourself, whenever you look for reassurance in the shifting tides of human conditions, you turn your back on the one place where peace truly dwells. You are like the man who stands in the blazing sunlight and asks, "Where is the light?" You are like the wave that searches the ocean for water. You are already standing in the fullness of the kingdom, but you are unaware of it because your attention has been trained to look outward rather than inward. To shift your identity from the anxious self to the self of the kingdom is not an act of effort. It is not achieved by discipline, by memorizing truth, by reciting affirmations, or by forcing the mind into new habits. It is a gentle turning, a quiet resting, a simple recognition of what already is. Right now, this very moment, the presence of God is living you. It is beating your heart, breathing your breath, guiding your steps, sustaining your life. And yet, when you believe yourself separate from that presence, when you identify with the mortal sense of self, you feel fear. The fear is the signal that you have forgotten the kingdom within. It is the knock upon the door of consciousness calling you home. And so when anxiety arises, do not battle it, do not seek to silence it by solving outer problems. Instead, let it remind you, I have been living as a self apart from God. Let me return to the kingdom within. The moment you turn inward quietly, gently, you will feel a shift. It may be slight at first, like the softest breath across the surface of the heart, but it is the beginning of returning to your true place And as you rest in that inner presence, you will discover something profound. The anxious self cannot enter the kingdom. It dissolves at the threshold. Only the true self, the self that is one with the Father, can abide there. This is the great shift of identity. This is the golden unveiling. Not the changing of a frightened self into a stronger one, but the realization that the frightened self is not you at all, and that who you truly are has never once been separate from the infinite. Now let us consider something that lies at the heart of all human fear, especially fear surrounding money, security, and the future. Goldsmith taught that every form of limitation we experience begins not in the outer world, but in the mental image we hold of ourselves. It is not the circumstance that frightens us, it is the picture within consciousness that interprets the circumstance through the lens of separation. When you say, "I do not have enough," you are not describing a fact, you are describing a belief intertwined with an image. When you worry about losing a job or running out of resources, it is not the outer condition that produces fear. It is the inner picture of yourself as a being dependent upon those outer factors for life. And because this picture is built from human conditioning, from the collective belief in separation, it always depicts you as incomplete, unsupported, and vulnerable. This is why fear continues even when circumstances improve. A person may receive more income, a new opportunity, a better position, yet the anxiety remains just beneath the surface. Why? Because the mental image has not changed. The external scene shifts, but the internal picture remains the same frightened figure, always waiting for the next loss, the next downturn, the next misfortune. The shadow survives even when the sun is shining. But here is the liberating truth. This mental image is not your true self. It is a construct of the mortal mind. It is the way the world has taught you to see yourself, not the way God sees you. And to the degree that you identify with this image, you will experience the fear that belongs to it. The spiritual path, as Goldsmith understood it, is not the process of improving the mental image. It is not about convincing yourself you are wealthy when you feel poor, nor about denying the appearance of need. It is not about manipulating thought in order to produce a better outcome. All such efforts only reinforce the belief that the mental image is real and must be corrected. No, the spiritual way is entirely different. It is the gentle recognition that the mental image is not who you are. It is the realization that behind every fearful picture stands the presence that is never touched by lack, never diminished, never threatened, never dependent upon external supply. As you begin to see this, you will notice something subtle. The fear is always directed at the mental image, never at the true self. For the true self has no awareness of lack. It lives in the fullness of the kingdom, where supply is the very nature of being. And when you shift your attention away from the image and toward the one who is aware of it, the fear begins to dissolve, not because you have solved anything, but because you are no longer identifying with the one who fears. Try to observe this now. When a fear arises in your mind, perhaps about money, perhaps about the future, pause. Notice the picture. Notice how the mind projects a small, vulnerable figure standing alone in a world it cannot control. And then ask yourself, who is seeing this picture? Who is the witness? Who is the one behind the thought? In that moment of inquiry, you step out of the image and into the self that watches. You enter the kingdom within, and you will discover that the self which observes the fear is never the one experiencing it. It is untouched, undisturbed, whole. This is the beginning of freedom from lack. Not changing the image, but withdrawing reality from it. Not fighting the fear, but recognizing that the one who fears is not the one you are. Let us now come to a point that stands at the very center of Joel Goldsmith's message, the practice he called recognition, if you truly grasp this, you will understand why fear dissolves effortlessly and why supply flows without struggle. Every spiritual tradition has its methods, affirmations, rituals, disciplines, techniques, and there is a place for these in the early stages of awakening. But Goldsmith saw that the highest spiritual life is not achieved through effort. It is revealed through recognition. Recognition is the quiet awareness of what is already true. It does not add anything. It uncovers. It does not strive. It sees. It does not attempt to change conditions. It beholds the reality behind them. And in that simple beholding, transformation occurs naturally without human force. When you practice recognition, you are not trying to convince yourself of something. You are not attempting to rearrange the thought world or manipulate inner pictures. You are simply acknowledging that beneath the noise of the mind, beneath the surface of fear, beneath the shifting circumstances, the presence of God is already here, already functioning as your very consciousness. This is why Goldsmith taught that recognition is not a technique, it is a state of awareness. It is the acknowledgement that I and the Father are one, not as a theological statement, but as the living truth of your being. And once you begin to feel this, even faintly, fear loses its authority. For example, when an anxious thought arises, you do not fight it. You do not push it away. You do not reason with it. Instead, you step inward and quietly recognize this fear does not belong to the self that I am. The presence that lives as me is untouched. In that moment, the fear begins to fade, not because you have overcome it, but because you have withdrawn belief from it. You have recognized the one who stands behind it. And when a thought of lack appears, I may not have enough, what will I do next month? You do not attempt to imagine abundance or think positive thoughts. You simply rest in the awareness, infinite supply is my nature because I live in God and God lives as me. You are not calling supply to you. You are recognizing that supply is the activity of your own being. It cannot be added and it cannot be taken away. This is the great secret. The moment you stop trying to make truth do something for you, truth begins to reveal what has already been done. Struggle ends. Effort ends. The anxious mind grows silent because it no longer believes it carries the burden of living. Recognition is not a practice you do for hours. It is a moment-by-moment returning, a gentle turning inward whenever fear tries to claim you, a soft remembrance that your life is the life of God expressing as individual being. You will find that as this recognition deepens, you begin to live with a new kind of peace, a peace not dependent upon circumstances, a peace untouched by lack or change. It is not something you manufacture. It is simply the natural state of the one who knows its true identity. Recognition transforms because it reveals. And what it reveals is the presence that has been with you from the beginning, asking only to be acknowledged. Let us move now into one of the most liberating discoveries you will ever make on the spiritual path. It is the understanding that all outer forms of supply are merely channels, while the true source of supply is the infinite, invisible, the presence of God within your own consciousness. Until this distinction becomes clear, you will continue to fear because you will continue to look to the channel as if it were the source. Most of the world lives in bondage to channels. A paycheck appears and one feels secure. The paycheck disappears and one feels threatened. A business opportunity opens and hope rises. The opportunity closes and fear returns. Money comes in through one avenue and confidence grows. That avenue dries up and anxiety takes its place. But through all of this, the source has not changed. The infinite has not diminished. Only the outer channel shifted, and because the mind mistakenly worshipped the channel, it experienced the shifting as loss. But when you understand, as Goldsmith did, that the source of your supply is the very presence that lives you, a profound freedom begins to dawn. You realize that spirit is forever expressing itself as form, and that forms may come and go, but the activity of the infinite remains uninterrupted. A job may disappear, but not your supply. A client may cancel, but not your source of income. A market may collapse, but not the abundance of the kingdom. Channels will change as freely as waves upon the ocean, but the ocean never changes. This is why Goldsmith often used the analogy of sun and rays. The ray does not depend upon the window through which it shines. If one window closes, the sun simply finds another opening. The ray is never cut off from the sun, because its life is the sun, and so it is with you. If you identify with channels, you will fear. If you identify with the source, you will rest. Living from inner supply means recognizing that everything you need already exists within your consciousness as the presence of God. Your task is not to attract it, not to manifest it, not to visualize it. Your task is to acknowledge the truth that your being is rooted in the infinite, and therefore no outer form can add to you or take from you. When this truth begins to live in you, you stop chasing opportunities. You stop worrying about outcomes. You stop tying your well-being to the ups and downs of the world. Instead, you live in a quiet assurance that whatever is necessary for the fulfillment of your purpose will appear at the right time, through the right channels, without strain or fear. And you will discover something remarkable. When you are no longer hypnotized by the outer channels, new channels begin to open, channels you could not have predicted, planned, or forced. Supply flows not because you manipulate conditions, but because you are aligned with a source that never ceases to express itself. This is the beginning of a new way of living. It is not human living uplifted, it is spiritual living revealed. It is the life of inner abundance expressing through outer forms, effortlessly, gracefully, in perfect order. And once you taste this freedom, you will understand why Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life." Your Father knows. Your Father, the infinite within you, knows. And this knowing is the source of all that appears as your daily supply. Now that we have begun to discern the difference between the outer channels and the inner source, let us turn to something that many have misunderstood: the nature of miracles. Most people hear the word miracle and imagine a sudden change in outer conditions, an unexpected payment, a healing, a breakthrough, a shift in circumstances so dramatic it appears supernatural. But in the consciousness of Joel Goldsmith, a miracle is never something that comes to you from outside. This is the beginning of a new way of living. It is not human living uplifted, it is spiritual living revealed. It is the life of inner abundance expressing through outer forms, effortlessly, gracefully, in perfect order. A miracle occurs when the illusion of separation dissolves. That is all. It is the natural activity of the presence showing through the veil of the mortal mind. No pleading with God is necessary. No ritual is required. No technique will force it. The moment the false sense of self falls away, the infinite harmony that has been present all along becomes visible as form. This is why Goldsmith often said that we do not demonstrate anything. We do not demonstrate health, abundance, or harmony. We merely recognize the truth, and the truth demonstrates itself. The moment you stop trying to get something from God, the moment you stop attempting to correct error through mental effort, the moment you rest in the awareness of your oneness with the Father, Miracles unfold not because you caused them, but because nothing is blocking their natural expression. Consider how this looks in daily life. A person who has been struggling financially for years suddenly experiences a shift not in the outer world, but within themselves. They stop identifying with the anxious self. They stop begging for supply. They stop chasing outcomes. They become still, and in that stillness, they recognize the life I live is the life of the infinite. I cannot be separate from my supply. Very quietly, something changes. Fear begins to lose its grip. Restlessness fades. A sense of sufficiency rises not because the bank account has changed, but because the inner image has. And then, without planning or manipulating, opportunities appear. New channels open. Unexpected support arrives. People step forward. Circumstances align. But remember, these outer events are not the miracle. They are simply the form that the miracle takes. The miracle happened the moment you shifted consciousness. Everything else was just the natural outworking of that inner transformation. The same is true for healing. A person may carry fear in their body for many years. They try affirmations, treatments, disciplines, hoping to change the condition. But the fear persists because they are still living as the one who is separate from life. Then one day, perhaps in a moment of deep quiet, they stop resisting. They stop asking. They stop trying to change anything. And in that surrender, they feel even for an instant the presence of God within them as their own being. Nothing dramatic happens on the surface, yet something profound has occurred. A shift, a release, a recognition. And in the days or weeks that follow, the body begins to respond. The condition fades, strength returns, harmony reappears. But again, the healing is not the miracle. The recognition is the miracle. The healing is simply the visibility of the truth that was always present. This is why anxiety melts away when you turn inward. Fear has no root in the true self. It only survives in the mental image. And the moment the image is dissolved through recognition, you begin to live from a different center. Instead of reacting to appearances, you rest in the assurance that everything necessary for your life is already contained within your consciousness. When you know the truth of your being, outer conditions adjust themselves automatically. You do not make them adjust. You do not push them. You do not pray for them. You simply live in the awareness that the infinite invisible is your supply, your life, your intelligence, your guidance. And in that awareness, miracles are not events. They are the natural rhythm of your existence. This is why Goldsmith taught that the spiritual path is not a path of getting, but of seeing. Seeing who you truly are. Seeing the presence at the center of your being. Seeing that nothing can be added to or taken away from the infinite. And when this seeing becomes your way of life, the miraculous becomes ordinary. Let us now bring these truths into the rhythm of daily living, for the spiritual life is not measured by moments of inspiration alone, but by the quiet continuity of recognition throughout the ordinary movements of the day. Joel Goldsmith never asked us to retreat from life. Rather, he taught us how to walk through each hour with the awareness of the presence until the presence itself becomes the only life we recognize. Every day offers countless opportunities to choose between the anxious mind and the inner kingdom. And it is in these small, seemingly insignificant moments that consciousness is transformed. The way you begin your day, the posture you take before your work, the attitude with which you approach decisions, these are the places where the false self is either reinforced or dissolved. So let us consider a simple rhythm, not as a technique, but as a way of remembering, a way of returning to what is true. This is why Goldsmith taught that The spiritual path is not a path of getting, but of seeing. Seeing who you truly are. Seeing the presence at the center of your being. Seeing that nothing can be added to or taken away from the infinite. And when this seeing becomes your way of life, the miraculous becomes ordinary. You are not a mortal waking up to face a difficult world. You are the infinite expressing through an individual form. Second, the midday pause. At some point, perhaps while waiting in line, walking to your next task, or sitting in a moment of silence, stop for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is enough. In those 10 seconds, withdraw your attention from the passing scene and turn inward. Not to fix anything, not to solve anything, but to remember. The presence goes before me. The presence works through me. I do nothing of myself. This simple pause breaks the hypnotism of the world. It loosens the mind's grip on fear. It reminds you that you are not the one striving to make life work. Life is living you. Third, the evening release. When the day is closing, do not carry its impressions into the night. Let the thoughts, the conversations, the concerns, the unfinished tasks fall away, not by analyzing them, not by judging them, but by recognizing that none of these belong to the self that you are. In this gentle release, you return to the truth of your being. You rest in the awareness. God is the life of this day. God is the life of this night. Nothing real can be lost. This release is not merely psychological rest, it is spiritual rest. It allows the subconscious fears and tensions accumulated during the day to dissolve in the presence. Now, understand something important. This rhythm is not meant to create spiritual results. It is not meant to bring supply, healing, or protection. It is simply a way of shifting your identification from the anxious self to the self of God. And when that shift occurs, supply follows, healing follows, guidance follows, not because you sought them, but because you stopped resisting their natural flow. There is one more aspect of this rhythm, perhaps the most significant of all. Whenever fear arises, whenever a startling thought enters your mind, whenever the familiar tightening of anxiety begins to take hold, do not attempt to calm yourself by reasoning or positive thinking. Instead, step back and recognize this fear belongs to a self I am no longer identifying with. Then turn inward quietly, gently, and remember the presence. Do not try to change the fear. Do not resist it. Let it be. And rest in what is true. This is the presence before panic way of living. It is the conscious decision to return to God before you return to fear. And each time you choose the presence, the false self loses a little of its authority. Over time, you will find that fear approaches you less often, and when it does arise, it passes through you as lightly as a shadow across a wall. This is not discipline. This is devotion, the devotion to truth as your only reality. And now, as we come toward the close of our time together, let us gather all that has been revealed into one simple, living recognition. Everything we have explored, anxiety, supply, miracles, inner rhythm, comes down to this. Your true self has never been separate from God. All fear arises from forgetting this. All peace arises from remembering it. You do not need to fight the anxious self. You do not need to improve it, purify it, or make it worthy. That self is not you. It is only the shadow cast by the belief in separation. The moment you turn from it, not through effort, but through recognition, you discover the one who has been present all along, the self that lives in the kingdom and expresses the kingdom. The presence within you is not something you must seek. It does not appear because you practice long or pray intensely. It is here because it is your very being. You cannot escape it any more than a wave can escape the ocean. Your task is simply to acknowledge it quietly, sincerely, without strain. In this awareness, you begin to understand that there was never anything to fear. There was never anything to lack. There was never anything to chase. The anxious mind was living its own dream of isolation, and you mistook yourself for the dream figure. But now you are awakening. Now you are remembering. Let this remembrance deepen until it becomes the foundation of your life. I live, yet not I. The presence lives as me. Rest in that. Let that be your prayer, your meditation, your peace. Let it guide you when circumstances appear uncertain. Let it steady you when the world trembles. Let it silence the inner storm without a word. For the kingdom of God is not a future event. It is not a reward. It is not a place to reach. It is the inner radiance of your own being, shining quietly beneath every thought, every breath, every moment of your life. And when you return to that kingdom, when you rest in that presence, you discover that the whole purpose of the spiritual path is simply to be what you already are. So let this truth go with you now, not as an idea, but as a living realization. Wherever you walk, the presence walks. Whatever you face, the presence faces. Whatever you need, the presence provides. And whatever you fear dissolves the moment you turn inward and remember. I and the Father are one. There is no separation. In that recognition, your search ends, and your real life, your life rooted in the infinite, begins.